Hello, and thank you for tuning in. My name is Krista, and I have been part of the paranormal slash metaphysical world since I was, I would say, officially probably a teenager. And so that's many years. I won't give away my age. And I do Kabbalistic tarot card readings, palmistry, and animal card readings with my husband, Michael. And we started that in, I think it was 1997. And we've been doing that as pretty much our main job since then. So that's what I do for a living. And I also do some writing.
My name is Tiffiny Rose Allen. I am a poet and I usually refer to myself as like a spiritualist or a witch. I'm kind of loose on the term, to be honest, but yeah, I kind of dabble in a lot of different things, and I really like rocks and crystals, so I wrote a little bit about that for the journal.
Hi, so I'm Kristin Harris. I'm a local historian living in Salem, Massachusetts. I sort of cut my teeth in the grad program in American Studies at UMass Boston, and then ended up just staying here and doing historical interpretation in town, working at the witch house and doing witch trials history for a while. And then I started my own podcast because my sort of background has always been macabre history. And Salem, what sort of got me into it is that Salem sort of has this dichotomy of people that are into our spooky history and people that think we shouldn't really go that route. And so in working in Salem, getting my start here, and then sort of getting my start in academia, I just sort of realized, well, no, all of those things can work together and all of those things are a part of our history. And so I started the podcast just to talk a little bit more about that and a little bit more about how these things in New England have always been a conversation, whether it's the paranormal, spiritualism, the occult, anything like that. There's always been a sort of drive for that in New England, and some sort of real history behind it. So I just dug in and started my podcast. And it's a Life After Midnight, Strange History Salem Style.
Well, I will say that you'll see in the volume 2, my article is a personal story about a nightmare I had when I was I think I was probably, I don't know, it was about 8 or so, with Dracula, and how this became something. Working with nightmares was my introduction, and also there's a little bit more to the story. But I would say that was more like a reluctant entry. And even though I did grow up with a father who really, he's still alive and he's very metaphysical and he loved Edgar Cayce, it wasn't really until we had a family tragedy in our lives when my brother David was lost at sea in a kayaking accident, and my father started to really dig in kind of deep and go to psychics to see if they could find his body, first of all. And it was really traumatizing for all of us. But that was when I really started consciously delving in to make some sense of this tragedy and to, just figure things out. So I think probably around the age of 17.
Well, I guess it's not really super in depth. I just kind of, whenever I was little, I always liked picking up rocks from my driveway. And that was probably the first thing that I can remember, is I would always pick up rocks, and me and my mom would talk about how they had a little family. So I would keep them in a little bucket. That's like my earliest memory of like something I guess not everybody did, People are like, you collect rocks? That's weird. And I'm like, whatever. And then I kind of drifted away from that as I got older. And then I began working in a metaphysical shop at one point, and that really got me back into it. And I kind of considered that place to be my Hogwarts, because I really got immersed in a lot of knowledge there, and it kind of set me off on more of a on understanding things a little better. I'm like, oh, so that's not weird that I picked up rocks from my driveway. I'm like, that's nice.
a piece that was based on a paranormal experience I had as a little girl living in Bay City, Michigan. And I initially had a very, very strong nightmares with Dracula in it, but that was disturbing enough. But it was coming down the steps one night, my father would try to help me. I'd wake him up and he tried to help me to try and come to grips with this Dracula figure in my nightmares. And we were coming down the steps and I saw what to me looked like a sort of ghostly vampire in the window. And it was very clear. And I even shouted and I said, "Daddy, there it is." And I was pointing, and luckily my dad, he didn't see it, but he believed me. And he said later on that he really thought that house was odd. It was a particular, and after we moved out of the house, I never saw that particular apparition ever again. But the Dracula vampire theme continued in other ways. And so that's part of what the essay is about.
What inspired me to write it is a lot of people usually are like, oh, I only want like natural stones, which is totally fine, you know, if people that are into crystals and stuff, right? If you're not into crystals, I think this is a good introduction for, you know, kind of understanding, I guess, not scientifically, trying to think of another word, I guess understanding from a different viewpoint how you can use it as a tool, if that makes sense. So it's kind of about how a popular crystal, if you will, was created long ago. And it's a little bit of a myth, sort of factual. It's kind of an idea of sorts as to how it came to be, if that makes any sense. So yeah, without giving too much away, it is about what I consider to be a true alchemist stone. And alchemy in itself is about discovering and learning and experimenting. And I think spirituality as a whole kind of can be embodied within that. So.
A little tiny bit of a backstory to that. So when I sort of first started delving into, okay, let's take all this Salem folklore, the things that people, you know, hate hearing tour guides say on the street, and let's sort of really dig into it and see where the truth is, and sort of see what the cultural moment was like for Salem when these things started being said or when these things were talked about. And so I got with two ladies here in Salem that I still work with, Amber Newberry Izzo and Laurie Moran from Fun Dead Publications. They do indie horror short stories and writing. And I said, hey, I want to do a thing at the witch house. And they were like, okay, because that's kind of how we do it here in Salem. And so we did a whole night about Salem's connection with the supernatural, century by century. I literally took people from the 17th century to the 21st century and sort of talked about how Salem got to where it got, and that it wasn't just, you know, a 1970s tourist thing, like it goes far back. And when I started doing that research years ago, I came across Charles Henry Foster, who I wrote about for Feminine Macabre. And he was a medium who reached celebrity status in Salem in the 19th century that nobody really talked about. And I had not even heard of him until I moved to New England. And, you know, I always thought I was kind of on the up and up with all of this. I mean, I went to school for American Studies and focused on the history of the paranormal, like in my master's program. And, you know, so I'd heard of the Fox sisters, I'd heard of all these famous people, Lady Marjorie and, you know, Houdini's involvement and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and all of this like advent of the spiritualist movement and all these people that were involved in it. But I had never heard of Charles Henry Foster. And lo and behold, not only had I not heard of him, but he was a medium who was born, raised, lived in Salem and had his first experiences with the supernatural living in town. And so I just started delving into him and into sort of this perfect example of how many mediums of the time reached celebrity status only to sort of be debunked or come crashing down. And what intrigued me about him is that he was so influential, both in Salem and even in London and the UK and other places in Europe. But no one had heard about him. And so I wanted to sort of bring that up and say, you know, Salem, we have such this rich history, but there are things underneath the cracks that people never even hear about because they aren't one of those big blockbuster moments for us here in Salem. And I think Charles Foster is that. Like, no one has heard of him. I even know like some tour guides that hadn't heard of him. And so it's just really exciting for me to be a part of that. And I think that if I was going to put forward my first sort of Salem story, you know, I wanted to start with Charles Foster because that was sort of how I got into the world of digging more into Salem's supernatural history.
Honestly, I think I would say, you know, I guess it's not really obvious, but, you know, go off of your intuition. Like, for example, you collected a lot of rocks that you wouldn't consider to be the pretty sparkly rocks, you know, you just grabbed a fossil or whatever. That's what you were drawn to, and that's what you were called to, right? You want to go towards what you feel connected towards. So if you feel connected towards the crows that are like screaming outside your window and you're like, I wonder why they're yelling, are they trying to talk to me or something, you know? Or if you're walking around and you find a stick or a flower and you're like, this really is, you know, making an impact on me somehow and I don't know why, try to dig into that. Why do you feel so drawn to that thing? And do a little bit of research. Google can be your best friend sometimes. Different books and things. Really, honestly, I think intuition is such a powerful tool. And if we kind of learn to hone into it and focus on it and just try to listen to ourselves by viewing our surroundings, I think that's really the best place to start. If that makes sense, you know, like I was always kind of drawn to rocks and I never really knew why until I was a little bit older. And I'm like, okay, this makes sense now why I use this as a, you know, as a tool without even knowing. And a lot of the time, I think the more you dig into your journey and what you feel called towards, the more you're like, this is why I've always done that thing. This is why this has always been around me, you know? So really just kind of, I guess, pay attention to your routines and listen to yourself would be my best advice.
This might be kind of controversial, and it's even controversial for me, I must say it. And I'll just say, like, Johnny Zaffis, if you ever see this, I love you, I'm sorry, and I love you. But so the Warrants actually have always been huge role models of mine because like Ed and Lorraine Warren, because when I first started the master's program and I was working on my thesis, which was on popular culture and how it shaped post-industrial history with the paranormal, and sort of opened up avenues of history that people may not have had access to unless they had an interest in the paranormal. One of the things I did was sort of look at the advent of how these things were brought into the mainstream in a television standpoint, a mass media standpoint. And I started looking into the Warrens. And like, I have to say, like, flat out off the bat, I do not agree with prescribing, you know, a certain religion to any sort of case that you're investigating. And I am highly, highly against that. And I think it's unethical. But I can also, you know, be mature and acknowledge what the Warrens sort of did for cracking that door open in a way that I don't necessarily think it may have if they weren't so highly publicized when they were. And so I would say if I ever had a dream, and unfortunately that dream is gone now, I have possibly had Ed in the room after death. Another story for another time. But I always regret that I never got to meet them in person. I think they're two of my biggest sort of influences into this.
It's a fantastic question. And I have, even though I have embraced the paranormal metaphysical myself, I have found at times it's been difficult to be embraced by the world, even doing the tarot card readings. And so to that point, I would say at times I would internalize that outer non-acceptance of what I'm doing is very valid and very important and touches many people's lives. Sometimes you feel, at least for me, I would question whether or not I want to be in this world. And I would say, do I really, every now and then I'd say, maybe I'll get a job as an accountant somewhere. Because my husband and I have been doing this literally we live the world of the metaphysical world. And so on our downtime, we do kind of normal things, honestly. Though I've done more ghost hunting because of our friends and on my downtime than I used to. But I would say it's been both I've lived a fascinating life as a woman, and in some ways it's easier initially because, women are supposedly more intuitive. And so for me, doing card readings, but at the same time, when you start to deal with trying to prove the science of it, or to, with me, I'm an educated woman. I have a BA. So what, people might think, well, what are you doing card readings for? And at this age, and that kind of thing can make you question your sanity a little bit. But I think around the age of 50, I decided I just fully embraced no matter what the world thinks of me as a woman. And I have noticed, that we do our show, The Sixth Sense Society, and we did notice from the very beginning there weren't as many women in the ghost hunting shows. So we looked for people like you and Mystic Mitten to interview, because we thought, well, that's strange because we know a lot of women do this. But I had no idea the depth. And I think in your volume 1, that's what really shocked me, was how long women have been doing this unnoticed and in a very interesting and committed ways. So there is an element which is a little peculiar, because in a way, with the mythology of the paranormal, women have always been in the front of it in the stories and the abilities. So it is kind of odd to think, well, why is the world only now sort of catching on that women are doing all kinds of cool things in the metaphysical world and have been dedicated? So I think having this journal for me made me feel, as someone who sees herself as an outsider normally, and you can ask my husband how I've tried to join groups and it just never works out, that it makes me feel oddly part of the world of the paranormal and the metaphysical in a way I hadn't quite felt before. So I think that's, it shows, even though I've been dedicated to it, I love it, I do all kinds of things around the metaphysical world, I'm still growing, that there have been times I've questioned. It hasn't always been easy being a woman. And that sort of surprised me a little bit as I got older. Why would I still feel that way?
The best place to find me would be Instagram. My username is @dreamsandhiding.writing. I post a lot of different poetry things. I post a lot of pictures of flowers and scenery. So if you like that kind of thing, feel free to follow me. I currently have 5 collections of poetry that I've self-published. You can get them through Amazon or through Etsy. I also have an Etsy shop called Rose Creatrix, where I make a lot of little witchy things, as I like to call. And what else? I'm currently working on my 6th book, which is called We Are Based Off Our Dreamscapes, which I am very excited about because it is about dreams and really weird dreams that I've had that I kind of worked into short stories and stuff. And some meditations are in there as well. Like, not like how-to meditations, but like weird visions that I've had through meditation. So it's a little bit weird, but I'm really excited about it. And that will be coming out in October.
I definitely want to promote the Sixth Sense Society. You can find our website, sixthsensesociety.com, and it's all spelled out SIXTHSENSESOCIETY. And it's basically a metaphysical variety show. And so if anyone is ever interested in being on the show too, we would love to have you. And we have a range of topics, metaphysically and paranormal. And so that's kind of our baby, in the sense we don't make money from. And then you can also find me at mysticraven.net if you are interested in learning about the tarot readings I do and my husband does, and classes and things like that. But I particularly wanted to put a shout out to our YouTube channel, since I feel like that's where we're growing. And also it's helping me to connect to all kinds of really cool people I honestly would never have met, like you. And then as far as other projects, we are working on my husband and I, Michael, working on a Kabbalistic tarot book, which hopefully I'll get the first draft done the end of this year. Mostly Michael has laid down the groundwork. I'm doing most of the editing. And we're not sure if we're going to publish it, self-publish, or try to find a publisher. We're mixed about that yet. So that's maybe one of the projects. But the other thing is we really are hoping to grow Sixth Sense Society and do more 2-hour specials.
So my podcast again is Life After Midnight, Strange History Salem Style. The website is lifeaftermidnightsalem.com. And I think that's in my bio. If you do pick up a copy of Feminine Macabre Volume 2, and please do, and get Volume 1 too. And then it's on iTunes, and you can get the episodes through the website as well. The WordPress app, Good Pods. It's on all of those platforms. I'm working on getting it on Spotify, but Spotify's a tricky devil. And yeah, my Instagram is Life After Midnight Salem is the handle. So I'm on Instagram, and I do have some backlogs of episodes that I will be working on editing when I get a free minute. But yeah, so look forward to some new episodes coming up. So I have also been working on getting my own small tour company business off the ground. It's called Salem History and Haunts, TBD on that. That's the working name, but it's under my podcast and it's on my website. So I'm just getting some last minute sort of financial things in order with that. And I hope to be starting those tours by next year. So.